Homicide investigators faced a difficult question. Was the death of a young woman in a deserted park suicide, or was it murder? An alert homicide detective found a tiny clue in a suspect's trash can. And it was a discarded bandage, a dental expert, and a colossal blunder that revealed a love quadrangle with enough intrigue to go around. 19-year-old Devin Guzman left her apartment one night and never returned home. The next morning, her roommate, Carrie Renner, and a friend drove all around Easton, Pennsylvania, looking for her. Eventually, the girls found Devin's brand new car in a deserted lot.
When I saw her, Devin's, lips and eyebrows were purple, and I don't know why I didn't think she was not dead, probably because, nobody really expects that. And I shook her and she didn't answer. So I was screaming, I was hysterical.
Devin Guzman was pronounced dead at the scene.
She had sustained a severe laceration in the throat area.
An empty syringe was found in Devin's waistband, although toxicology tests showed no drugs in Devin's system. And in Devin's hand was a knife. There was no blood on it, and experts concluded from its size that it was not the murder weapon.
It was an unsophisticated attempt to lead police in the wrong direction, or to perhaps somehow we would conclude that it wasn't a murder.
The lack of blood at the scene, along with grass and dirt stains on the victim's pants, confirmed what police already knew.
It's a secondary crime scene for sure. What was apparent to us was, one, she didn't die there, two, she didn't get into the vehicle under her own power.
Devin's body had been covered with her own jacket, which investigators found revealing.
That's kind of a symbol to us that it was somebody who cared about her. We usually start with the people closest to the victim, and then we work outwards.
Devin left the apartment after the fight, and she denied having anything to do with Devin's murder. Investigators decided to take a much closer forensic look inside the apartment.
Everybody in Devin's family already think that I did it.
I thought it was her, gotta be honest with you, because she was the rough one. She was abusive towards Devin. And so that was my immediate thought, that this woman would do that.
Carrie Renner admitted that she fought with her roommate, Devin Guzman, the night before Devin's murder, but Carrie denied killing her. In their apartment, in the shower stall, investigators found Devin's car mat. It appeared to have been recently washed. Investigators sprayed luminol in the shower stall underneath the mat, and it glowed. It was a positive presumptive test for the presence of blood. DNA tests confirmed the blood in the shower stall was that of the victim, Devin Guzman.
So our thinking is, well, could the murder have happened in the shower? And could it have started, in the car where there could have been blood, or she had blood on that when she was transported into the vehicle?
Carrie was immediately brought to police headquarters and given a lie detector test.
It was terrifying. It was scary, but, mean, I had nobody there that I knew. There was nothing I could do, and I didn't want to give in and say, okay, you're right, because I know I didn't do it.
The results of the polygraph were inconclusive.
Carrie is a viable suspect. We can't rule her out at this time. We have signs of a struggle at her house. We have traces of blood, and we just can't rule her out.
But investigators found something else in Devon's background. Devon had another lover, a married woman, Michelle Hetzel. In fact, Devon and Michelle had recently returned from a vacation together in the Virgin Islands. While there, the two made a commitment to one another.
She told me that they got married, and they go through these things, you know. I gave my advice the best I could with what I saw. But, you know, being 19, you can only do so much. You can't chain them to the porch.
Police learned that Carrie Renner wasn't the only one upset by this affair. Michelle's husband, Brandon Bloss, wasn't thrilled either.
It really creates ego problems. It's one thing if your wife starts having an affair with another male. I think if your wife's having an affair with a female, it even creates more problems. And I think that since that was occurring in this relationship, it caused quite a bit of anger between Brandon and Devon.
Friends told police that Devon, Carrie, Michelle, and even Michelle's husband, Brandon, were often at odds.
Of course, anytime you interject a third person without the consent of both parties, there's going to be a problem there.
It's 4 people, not just Michelle and her husband, and Devon. It was also Carrie was involved, and that Carrie was the spark plug, if you will.
In tracing Devon Guzman's last known movements, a witness told police he saw Devon Guzman at Michelle and Brandon's home on the night of her murder.
I woke up because there was some noise outside that I realized was an argument. The woman that I now know to be Devon was standing on the doorstep of the house in back of me with 2 people inside the house, 3 of them arguing. I looked at the clock, it was 12:35.
Detectives sprayed the inside of the couple's home with fluorescein, which is like luminol in that it glows when it comes into contact with red blood cells. They found nothing.
We should be able to detect blood all over the place if this is where her throat was cut. And we go into the house, and we're all over the place, and we're not coming up with anything.
Since dirt and grass stains were found on Devon's pants, investigators decided to spray items in the couple's backyard with fluorescein. There, on a pool cover and on the nozzle of a water hose, were tiny traces of blood. But the blood couldn't be tested for DNA.
It's been too heavily washed off. There's just not enough genetic material there. And when you go to do DNA from blood, there's no DNA in red blood cells. You have to get it from a nucleated cell, like a white blood cell. And there's just not enough there for testing.
Police found another suspicious piece of evidence in the couple's washing machine.
Well, there was a pair of jeans belonging to Michelle Hetzel, and there was some water in that. Police took the jeans and water, and it tested positively presumptive for presence of blood.
The blood was so diluted, it was impossible to get a DNA profile. But in a pocket of Michelle's jeans, police found the plastic cap of a drug syringe, the same type of syringe which was in Devon's waistband.
Michelle Hetzel had worked for a physician in a physician's office where she may have had access to those types of syringes.
Police now had 3 suspects in the murder of Devon Guzman, and all of them had the motive and opportunity to commit the crime. On the night of her murder, Devon Guzman got into a fight with her roommate, Carrie Renner. She then drove to the home of her other lover, Michelle Hetzel.
I really didn't like Carrie. I thought Michelle was the sweet one. Carrie was the bad one.
Carrie Renner, Michelle Hetzel, and her husband Brandon all denied any involvement in the murder. Michelle and Brandon admitted that Devin paid them a visit around midnight, but said she left about an hour later. But based on the forensic evidence, police didn't believe Devin ever left the couple's home alive.
First of all, no one saw her anywhere other than there. That was the last time she was seen, was at that location.
Detective Barry Golozeski decided to put Brandon and Michelle's home under 24-hour surveillance. He saw Brandon take the garbage out to the sidewalk and, on a hunch, confiscated it, since trash is considered public property once it's put out for collection. In the trash bag, Golozeski discovered something suspicious: a used Telfa pad, commonly used to cover open wounds.
And it has a unique wound outline on it. You're able to see the entire outline, and it sort of looked like a mouth.
According to Golozeski, they look like bite marks, that's imprinted on these bandages.
Scientists examined the Telfa pad with alternate light sources, which can provide much more information than an examination with normal white light.
If you look at the gauze pad under white light and you see absolutely nothing, you may go to an alternate light source and find a material which has oozed from the bite mark that does react to the alternate light source.
Under the alternate light source, an image appeared on the bandage.
The shape of the image on the bandages was elliptical. It had the same type of measurement you would look at when you see a bite mark, and I told him it was very possible that this actually was a bite mark.
Investigators now had legal authority to inspect Brandon Bloss's body. On his left forearm was the clear impression of a fresh bite wound. But whose was it? The medical examiner ordered Devin's body to be exhumed for a sample of her bite impressions.
Well, this is the first time that I've ever been asked to secure dental impressions of a deceased victim, especially one who has been exhumed. I've never done it before, and I'm not quite certain if I know of anybody else in my field that has done it before.
Dr. Scanlon took a cast of Devin's teeth like an orthodontist does when making braces, then scanned the casts into a computer. Using a process called hollow volume overlay, Dr. Scanlon superimposed computer-generated hollow outlines of Devin's teeth over a scale photograph of the bite mark on Brandon's arm. The outer rim of the bite cast and the outer rim of the bite mark were consistent. Police were convinced that the bite wound on Brandon's arm was from Devin Guzman. But this was proof that Brandon and Devin fought. It was not proof of murder.
I don't think that science in any way inculpates Brandon toward a murder at all. What it proves is Devin Guzman bit Brandon Bloss, period.
Then police realized something. They had Michelle's car in their possession. Why? Michelle was driving when she and Carrie found Devin's body. And Michelle inadvertently pulled up too close to Devin's car, so close that her car was impounded as part of the crime scene.
And I don't think Michelle has ever dreamed that her car was going to be impounded as part of that search.
In Michelle's trunk, police found Brandon's clothing and some rubber gloves.
We find clothing, sweatshirt, jeans, socks, shoes, and underwear, and they're all consistent with a male of Brandon's build, and there's blood that's evident on these clothes.
DNA testing of the blood on Brandon's clothes revealed it was Devin Guzman's.
It is direct evidence that shows that the husband, Brandon Bloss, had contact with this victim and when she was bleeding. It's tough to explain that one.
Brandon Bloss and Michelle Hetzel were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors do not believe Carrie Renner had anything to do with her roommate Devin Guzman's murder. The small traces of Devon's blood in the apartment shower could easily have been menstrual. And forensic testing of Devon's car mat in the apartment revealed the stains were from food, not blood. Prosecutors believe Michelle and Brandon killed Devon Guzman because of jealousy.
Michelle is married to Brandon, and he's living with her, but yet Devon and Michelle are still having a relationship going on. So obviously there's jealousy from multiple people involved.
Prosecutors say Michelle Hetzel was jealous of Devon's continuing relationship with Carrie Renner.
There was no question that there was this relationship, and there were some jealousies between the girls. They both had a reason to get rid of her.
And there may have been a financial motive as well. When Devon and Michelle went to the Virgin Islands together, Michelle charged the entire vacation on her husband's credit card, including their so-called wedding rings.
$7,000. Well, guess who earned that money? Brandon. Michelle couldn't keep a job, didn't have a job at the time. She was cheating on her spouse, not with another man, but with another woman.
Prosecutors were convinced the murder was premeditated. Phone records showed that Michelle or Brandon called Devon on the night of the murder. A neighbor confirmed seeing Devon arrive around 12:30.
That's good. Thanks. Cool. So, you go outside? Sure.
At some point, the couple lured Devon out to their backyard and attacked her. The evidence suggests Devon fought back aggressively, biting Brandon's arm in the process. But she was no match for the knife. No one knows who actually wielded the knife. The forensic evidence suggests the couple dragged Devon's body to the car, leaving grass and dirt stains on her pants. Michelle and Brandon then drove Devon's body and her car to the deserted park just 2 miles from their home, where they staged the scene to make Devon's death appear to be a suicide. But they made several mistakes. When Michelle planted the syringe, she left the cap in her jeans, where it was later found by police. The evidence suggests Brandon removed his bloody clothes at the park and put them in the trunk of Michelle's car.
I think he actually comes home naked, jumps in the car, which his wife had to drive. Otherwise, we wouldn't find the clothing in her car.
Later, the couple tried to remove the blood evidence from their backyard with the garden hose, but it was discovered with fluorescein. The next day, when Michelle and Carrie Renner went searching for Devon, Michelle pulled her car so close to Devon's car that police considered it part of the crime scene. This meant that the police didn't need a search warrant to look inside Michelle's trunk. Michelle and Brandon eventually turned on one another. Brandon said Michelle was the one who killed Devon, and Michelle said it was Brandon.
She's a compulsive liar. I mean, she lies so much that she has to make up lies to cover her other lies, and she's probably exhausted.
There was a witness that we called the trial that said about 30 or 40 days prior to this, he had been solicited by Michelle that she would give him sex or money or both if he would take out and kill Devon, that she wanted to get rid of her.
In the end, Brandon Bloss and Michelle Hetzel were both convicted of Devon Guzman's murder. They were both sentenced to life in prison. Had it not been for the forensic evidence, an innocent person might have been punished.
Once they thought that I was the one that did it. I mean, so we really actually needed the, forensics to actually put them away.
And the guilty may have gone unidentified.
But for the science, we would not have made an arrest in this case, and we certainly could not have gotten a conviction.
It was really quite amazing, and And as time goes on, I find that, you know, becomes more amazing what they do. I find myself watching these kind of shows myself because.
Well, I think that this was excellent investigation work by Detective Golozeski, who really, as I said, cracked this case and deserves a lot of the credit for the successful prosecution of it.
It was kind of the first time I've ever had a homicide case where the victims actually had evidence that came from her own mouth in order to convict, you know, her killer.
When a 42-year-old married man ran off to Montana with a married woman, friends and family called it a midlife crisis. When he disappeared just a year later, friends and family called that a homicide. The case went unsolved for 15 years, until a Civil War buff found more than military memorabilia in the grounds near Gettysburg. Franklin County sits on the outskirts of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, a must-see for tourists and military historians alike. But the locals found the lives of Melvin and Joanne Snyder far more interesting than those Civil War battlefields. On Saturday, May 25, 1985, Joanne Snyder left for work around 5:30 a.m. She baked pies for a local diner. When she returned home around noon, her 43-year-old husband Melvin was gone, and so was his truck.
She looked around for him and observed some things that she felt were out of the ordinary. First of all, he left his tools out. Melvin Snyder was very meticulous about his things. He was very careful about his things. He wouldn't have just left his tools laying about.
Joanne had called some of her family to come over and help look for Melvin.
While searching the property, a family member found a .25 caliber shell casing on the barn floor, but there was no blood evidence anywhere nearby.
A bullet like that will usually not travel through a human body. If it does not travel through, you're usually not going to get blood running anywhere. It's not like the typical TV shows where you see blood flying everywhere.
There were no eyewitnesses, unless maybe there were some barnyard animals, and of course they weren't talking.
Joanne waited for 2 days before she filed a missing persons report. Police found Melvin's pickup truck about 60 miles away in Reisterstown, Maryland. It was in a grocery store parking lot. Melvin's checkbook and .22 caliber rifle were still inside the truck, so the motive wasn't robbery.
The truck was left windows partially down, keys in the ignition. I believe some of Melvin's belongings were still located in the truck. Other than that, the truck was in fine condition except for some marks in the back of the bed of the pickup truck.
And the truck radio was tuned to a rock music station.
Melvin Snyder never listened to rock music.
Melvin Snyder was well known in his small town. Just a year earlier, Melvin had an affair with a married woman, Teresa Harshman, whom he knew from square dancing. Melvin and Teresa left their jobs and families behind and fled to Montana. Melvin's wife Joanne and Teresa's husband Ron took the opportunity to get better acquainted too.
Mr. Harshman and Mrs. Snyder struck up a relationship and were intimate with one another.
But after only 3 weeks, Melvin and Teresa decided they had made a mistake and moved back home.
Gentlemen, change partners across from where you are. Change partners and swingers.
However, in this recent disappearance, neither Teresa Harshman nor her husband Ron knew of Melvin's whereabouts. And the bank reported no activity on any of Melvin's credit cards.
He had a young son. He was early 20s. And this wasn't the kind of man that would just run off and leave family obligations.
Which is why investigators began to suspect foul play. "43-year-old Melvin Snyder, a gentleman farmer and factory worker, went missing. His family knew of no reason why he would have left home.
He would virtually have to live in a cave and have no contact with the outside world, not to have some sort of record with something.
We had divers check the ponds in the area, talk to neighbors if they had seen anything unusual, if they saw him leave. No one did.
Melvin's dental records were compared to every unidentified body discovered anywhere in the United States, with no success.
There was even an occasion where in a local landfill, they believed that they had found a hand, and that was studied forensically. Of course, it was determined that it wasn't a human hand. They believed that it was perhaps animal, maybe a bear, but it wasn't Melvin Snyder's hand.
The only lead in the case was from a neighbor who said he saw a brown pickup truck near Melvin's home on the day he disappeared. It was similar to the truck Ron Harshman owned. Ron's wife and Melvin Snyder once had an affair.
Whether it was Harshman's truck or not, I don't know. We don't know.
Police discovered that Harshman had purchased a .25 caliber handgun just a few weeks before Melvin's disappearance. Coincidentally, a .25 caliber shell casing was discovered in Melvin's barn on the day he disappeared. Police searched Harshman's home and found ammunition for a .25 caliber weapon, but no gun.
I asked him where the gun was, and he said, "You'll have to ask Teresa. She's the one who took the gun. She liked it, and she took it." So when we asked her, she said, "No, that's a lie. I don't even like guns. I don't know anything about the gun."
During their investigation, police also learned that Ron Harshman and Melvin Snyder once had an unpleasant confrontation over the affair Melvin was having with Ron's wife.
He learned that Mr. Snyder was coming to his home to pick up his wife, and he crashed his car into him.
He had a gun with him at that point, shot at him, did not hit him. Nothing happened. No one was hurt.
Melvin didn't want to pursue the matter, and no charges were filed.
Melvin had expressed a great deal of embarrassment about the whole incident, and I think he sort of felt that, I certainly don't condone that kind of reaction from Harshman, but I think Melvin felt that it was in part his own fault that this had happened.
And there was one more interesting twist in the case. Melvin and Joanne Snyder had come to terms with the affair, but the Harshmans had not.
Melvin was trying very hard to make the marriage work. Mr. and Mrs. Harshman, on the other hand, had a rockier road, although they did attempt to patch things up. Eventually, in the following spring, they separated, and Teresa filed for divorce.
Joanne Snyder denied any involvement in her husband's disappearance, but she admitted having several telephone conversations with Ron Harshman the week before Melvin disappeared. Both Joanne and Ron insisted the calls were innocent.
I'm sure there was still a little bit of resentment there. What happened a year prior when Melvin left. I know she was having conversations with Ron Harshman. Whether or not there was anything more to their relationship.
And that's where things stood. 1 year later, Ron and Joanne Harshman divorced, sold the farm, and Ron moved out of the area. He continued to say he had nothing to do with Melvin's disappearance, and he even demanded a meeting with police to stop what he called their harassment.
We did have the meeting. We had lunch together. He was sociable. but he bordered on being angry. And the whole purpose was for me to stop interfering in his life, both his social life and with his co-workers. I explained to him that I was an investigator and that all he had to do was to take a polygraph test, and I would personally apologize to everyone, including his co-workers.
But that was an offer he didn't care to accept.
We had no body, we had no actual gun. We knew what the past history was between Ron Harshman and Melvin Snyder. And common sense will tell you that, yeah, he has a good reason to want to kill Melvin Snyder. He's the only person that we know of that ever wanted to harm Melvin, but that doesn't prove it in a court of law.
Before his disappearance, Melvin Snyder told friends that he was afraid of Ron Harshman because Ron was still angry about the affair he had with his wife.
I always have a strange feeling about the fact that he, in essence, had predicted something like this was going to happen.
For the next 15 years, the case haunted prosecutor Jack Nelson. He knew Melvin Snyder personally, and something just didn't add up. A .25 caliber shell casing was discovered in Melvin's barn, and Ron Harshman purchased a .25 caliber handgun just a few weeks before Melvin disappeared. But Ron was never able to produce the weapon, saying it had been misplaced.
There was a lot of information there, but nothing new was coming in to give you the opportunity to do anything more with it.
Nelson pored over the case file and discovered an interesting notation. Ron Harshman admitted test firing his new .25 caliber pistol in his backyard just after buying it. That gave Nelson an idea.
What about going out there and seeing if we can find a shell casing, and then compare that to the one in the barn?
Mr. Nelson originally told me that. I just kind of gave him a look, like, this is 15 years to try to find a shell casing in grass, and we're not sure of the exact area. But in this case, being the fact that it's a murder, I'm willing to try any idea, and it was worth a shot to do.
Police found help in nearby Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Don Hinks was known in these parts as a retailer who sells metal detector equipment. These metal detectors were often used to unearth military artifacts.
Now, when I went out and found 3 French and Indian War cannonballs in one hole on the Braddock campaign, that probably gave me a bigger high than this .25 caliber automatic shell casing.
But Hinks and several of his colleagues were happy to do what they could, despite the fact Harshman's farm was several hundred acres.
But there was so much trash out there, so much farm equipment. It's the place where they would throw the garbage along with the tin foil and the toothpaste tubes, and all the junk went out there. So the challenge was working through 130 years of trash and picking up the little single .25 caliber automatic shell casing that we were looking for.
Modern metal detectors use computer processors to measure levels of conductivity, which enables them to identify the type of metal and the depth of an object underground.
They're basically computers that can pretty well tell you what's down there, how deep it is, does everything but dig for you today.
Hinks and his team found many shell casings, but none that were .25 caliber. Then, Hinks got a signal near a clothesline post.
In about 20 minutes, I got a signal that was in the proper reading range as far as the detector was concerned for a shell casing, and it went down. So we cut a little plug, turned it over, and there, sitting right in the plug, was a .25 caliber shell casing stuck to the bottom. When you look at it and you see the patina on it, you know it's not a freshly buried object.
My first thought was, this is going to be too good to be true. This can't be the one that he actually fired.
investigators hoped that after 15 years in the ground, the shell could still be tested. 15 years after Melvin Snyder's disappearance, investigators found a .25 caliber shell casing several inches beneath the soil on Ron Harshman's farm. It was the same caliber and made by the same manufacturer as the shell casing found in Melvin's barn. When someone pulls the trigger of a gun, there's a mini explosion inside. The bullet goes through the barrel. The shell casing is forced backwards, coming into contact with the breech face before it is ejected. The breech face in any gun has unique and distinctive marks from the manufacturing process.
It's subjected to several milling and finishing processes which cause small microscopic imperfections to be imparted to the surface.
And those same marks are imprinted on each and every shell casing that exits that gun. Ballistics experts at the Pennsylvania State Police Crime Lab were asked to analyze both shell casings.
When he first got the casing, he said, it's somewhat corroded and it's been exposed for a long period of time. He said, don't get your hopes up.
I'm not a soil expert. It could have the effect of minimizing any distortion or variation that could occur had it been on the surface of the ground and maybe been exposed to rain and corrosion, other things like that. Being underground may have, in fact, in this particular case, helped to maintain the quality of the markings that were present on the primer. But again, it can vary from case to case.
Under a microscope, firearms examiners discovered this was precisely what happened. The impressions on the shell casing were still clear, and those impressions caused by the breech face were identical to the breech face impressions on the shell casing found in Melvin Snyder's barn.
There was no doubt in my mind whatsoever that these two discharged cartridge cases had originated from the same source, same firearm.
Why would he have shot his gun on Mr. Snyder's property? There was no reason for that except for the fact to kill him.
Based on the ballistic evidence, prosecutors charged Ronald Harshman with first-degree murder. Melvin Snyder disappeared on May 25th, exactly 1 year to the day from when Melvin started the affair with Teresa Harshman.
Mr. Harshman is the kind of man that no one was going to tell him what to do. No one was going to take his property. He became very vengeful, very angry. He was not the kind of person that was going to allow his wife to return home and try to rebuild their relationship. There was no forgive and forget. It was, I will get my revenge. And that's what he did.
Prosecutors say the crime was premeditated. The evidence suggests that Harshman drove to Melvin's home, found him inside the barn, then shot and killed him with his new .25 caliber pistol. The .25 caliber round probably didn't exit Melvin's body. Prosecutors believe Harshman drove home and returned later on his motorcycle. After he disposed of Melvin's body, he put his motorcycle in the back of Melvin's truck, which created the damage found in the bed of the truck. Harshman then abandoned Melvin's truck 60 miles away in Maryland and drove his motorcycle home.
What did he do with the body? The body, after 19 years, has not been found. Carefully, he must have planned where he was going to take the body, how he was going to dispose of the body.
During police questioning, Joanne Snyder admitted that she told Ron Harshman that Melvin would be home alone that day. But prosecutors had no proof she had any prior knowledge of the murder.
I think Joanne had some involvement in this case. Now, I'm not sure whether or not that was done intentionally or if she was being used by Ron Harshman and didn't realize she was setting Melvin up.
Ron Harshman pled not guilty. Prosecutors knew that trying a case with only one piece of forensic evidence would be difficult.
There aren't a whole lot of cases out there that get prosecuted without a body. There aren't a whole lot of cases that get prosecuted without a weapon. And for a case to be prosecuted with no body and no weapon was almost unthinkable.
In July 2001, a jury convicted Ron Harshman of first-degree murder and sentenced him to life in prison.
He came 16 years close to getting away with this. 16 years is an awfully long time to get away with murder. He came very close.
It was 15 years later, after the murder, that we went out and found that shell case before everything caught up with him, and now he's in his orange prison jacket paying for his crime. He'll catch up with you sooner or later.
At 11:47 p.m. on a cold November night in Georgia, a telephone rang inside a small county dispatch office. The voice on the other end was low, male, shaking. He gave the dispatcher a name, Rachel Monroe. Then he said she was dead. The dispatcher asked where. The caller hesitated. Then he gave an intersection. Before the dispatcher could ask anything else, the line went silent. No name, no explanation, no confession. Just one sentence that would haunt investigators for decades. She trusted the wrong people. By sunrise, Rachel Monroe had vanished. Her car was found abandoned beside a rural road. The driver's door was open. The keys were still inside. One shoe lay beneath the door. And on the passenger seat was a small silver button that did not belong to her. At first, police thought Rachel had simply left. Then they found the blood. A small amount. Almost invisible. But enough to change the case. Rachel was 26 years old. She worked in an accounting office. She lived a quiet life. She had no known enemies. No history of disappearing. No reason to abandon her car in the middle of the night. Her family knew something was wrong immediately. Her sister called hospitals. Friends called her workplace. Neighbors searched nearby roads. Then police discovered that Rachel had not gone home. She had never made it there. The investigation began with a missing person report. Within hours, it became a homicide investigation. But there was a problem. There was almost no crime scene. No body. No weapon. No eyewitness willing to speak. Only a car. A button. A few drops of blood. And an empty stretch of Georgia road. Detectives began reconstructing Rachel's final day. She had arrived at work shortly after 8 in the morning. Co-workers remembered her as focused, quiet, but something about her seemed different. She had been checking financial records. She had asked questions. She had written notes. One co-worker remembered Rachel saying she had discovered something that didn't add up. Nobody thought much of it. That changed after she disappeared. Her desk was searched. Inside a drawer, investigators found handwritten calculations, names, dates, numbers. One name appeared several times. David Mercer. Mercer was Rachel's supervisor. He was respected, married, established. He had no criminal record. He had even joined the search for Rachel. Another name appeared in Rachel's notes. Thomas Avery, a mechanic who had done contract work for the company. The connection seemed insignificant, at least at first. Then investigators learned that Avery owned a green pickup truck. A witness had seen a green pickup near Rachel's car that night. The witness could not identify the driver, but the detail was entered into the file. Then another witness remembered seeing a dark sedan nearby. The case suddenly had 2 vehicles, 2 possible movements, 2 men connected to Rachel, and no explanation. Police searched the surrounding area. They found tire tracks, footprints, a torn piece of fabric. But the rain came. The evidence weakened. Then the search moved farther into the countryside. 3 days later, a volunteer discovered disturbed soil on a remote property. The ground looked recently moved. Police arrived. They began digging. And beneath the soil, they found Rachel. She had been wrapped in material. Her hands were bound. The discovery transformed the case. Rachel was no longer missing. She had been murdered. The county was stunned. People who had seen her at work days earlier were now watching news reports about a homicide. Her family stood outside the morgue waiting for confirmation. The community demanded answers. Police promised them, but the answers never came. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma. Rachel had suffered a severe injury to the head. The exact weapon was never recovered. There was no clear defensive wound, no usable fingerprint, no reliable eyewitness, and no confession. The investigation focused on Avery. He owned the green pickup. He knew the property. He had worked near Rachel, and investigators discovered that he had purchased rope and bleach on the night she disappeared. That was suspicious. Extremely suspicious. But suspicion was not proof. Avery claimed the supplies were for cleaning his workshop. He said he had never seen Rachel that night. He said he had gone home. His story appeared believable, until the fuel station clerk remembered him. The clerk recalled a man driving a green pickup. He remembered the purchase, bleach, rope, late at night, and he remembered something else. A second man had been standing outside, watching. The second man had been driving a dark sedan, David Mercer's vehicle. Mercer denied being there. He said he had gone home after work. His wife initially supported that statement. Then detectives discovered the time gap. Mercer had left work shortly after 6, but his wife remembered him arriving home after 11. Where had he been? He had no answer. The case tightened. Then it broke apart. The laboratory could not establish a direct connection between Avery and Rachel. The fibers were inconclusive. The metal fragment from the car was too damaged. The witness memories were uncertain. The financial records were suspicious but did not prove murder. The investigation reached a dead end. Avery was questioned again. Mercer was questioned again. Both men denied involvement. Both men remained free. Rachel's family waited. Months passed. Then, years. The case became one of Georgia's forgotten cold cases. The file moved from desk to desk. Detectives retired. Witnesses died. Evidence disappeared into storage. Rachel's photograph faded on old bulletin boards. Her family refused to stop asking questions. But every new lead ended the same way. Nothing. No arrest. No confession. No answer. Then, decades later, technology changed the investigation. The case was reopened. Every piece of evidence was removed from storage. Every envelope was photographed. Every fiber was examined. Every old statement was entered into a modern database. And investigators noticed something nobody had paid attention to before. The button. That tiny silver button recovered from Rachel's car. For 35 years it had been treated as a curiosity. Now it was examined under advanced magnification. The button carried microscopic traces, fabric, skin cells, and a pattern in the stitching. Investigators located Avery's old jacket. His family had kept it. One button was missing. The stitching around the empty position showed damage. The laboratory compared the material. The button matched. Then came the DNA. A tiny biological sample was recovered from the damaged stitching. It was consistent with Rachel. The evidence suddenly became much more powerful. Rachel's biological material was inside the area where Avery's button had torn away. That suggested direct contact. Violent contact. Then investigators tested preserved material from Rachel's clothing. Avery's DNA appeared again. The cold case moved, but something else happened. Mercer's old wife had died years early. Her belongings were stored by relatives. Among them was a diary. The diary contained entries from November 1987. One entry stopped investigators cold. David came home very late. Clothes smelled like smoke. Another entry followed. David says they are getting close. Then, Thomas came by. They talked outside. The diary had never been part of the original investigation. Now it changed the timeline. Mercer had lied. He had not gone directly home. He had been communicating with Avery, and his wife had suspected something was wrong. Investigators brought Mercer back. He was old now, weak. His memory was failing. But when detectives mentioned the diary, he became silent. Then he admitted it. He had been on the road. He had seen Rachel. He had seen Avery. And he had lied because he was afraid. The confession was not complete. Mercer insisted he had not killed Rachel. He claimed Avery had attacked her. He claimed he had panicked. He claimed he helped afterward because he feared Avery would kill him too. Investigators did not immediately believe him, but his story contained details never released publicly. He knew where Rachel had been buried. He knew what Avery had purchased. He knew about the movement of her car. He knew details of the financial dispute. And he knew something else. Rachel had discovered a secret, a financial scheme involving both men. She had copied documents. She had threatened to expose them. That gave investigators a possible motive. Rachel had not been randomly selected. She had discovered something dangerous, something that could destroy careers, finances, and reputation. She had confronted Mercer, then Avery, and on the night she disappeared, the confrontation became violent. But the most shocking evidence had not yet surfaced. Investigators found an old Cosette tape among Rachel's belongings. The recording was damaged. The voice was faint, but it was Rachel. She was speaking to someone shortly before her disappearance. Her words were broken by static. Then one sentence became clear. "If something happens to me, they have the copy." The recording ended. Her own voice had become evident. She had known she was in danger. She had tried to leave a trail, and she had succeeded. The copies were eventually found inside a waterproof envelope hidden in an old drainage pipe. The documents showed suspicious payments. Mercer had approved them. Avery had received money. Rachel had documented the transaction. The motive was no longer speculation. It was written in her own handwriting. The investigation moved toward prosecution. Avery was arrested. The news shocked the community. The man who had lived quietly for decades was now accused of killing Rachel Monroe. But the case still had one problem. Mercer was cooperating, and the defense would attack him. They would call him a liar, a man protecting himself, a man who had waited 35 years to tell his story. The prosecution knew that. So they built the case around evidence that did not depend on Mercer. The button, the DNA, the vehicle, the fibers, the burial site, the financial records, the witnesses, the timeline. One piece after another, until the case became impossible to dismiss as a single man's accusation. Then came the trial. Rachel's family sat in the front row. Avery sat across the room. For the first time in 35 years, the people connected to Rachel's disappearance were in the same courtroom. The prosecutor displayed the photograph of Rachel's abandoned car, the open door, the shoe, the empty road, then the silver button. The smallest clue in the entire case. The defense called it meaningless. The prosecution called it the beginning. And as the evidence unfolded, the jury began to see what investigators had finally understood. The cold case had never been empty. The truth had been there all along, buried in paperwork, locked inside evidence boxes, hidden in forgotten photographs, trapped in old fibers, waiting inside a diary, waiting inside a damaged Cosette, waiting inside a tiny silver button. And when modern science finally examined what investigators had once overlooked, the past opened again. Rachel's family had waited 35 years. Now they were finally hearing the evidence in public. But the courtroom was about to hear something even more disturbing, because David Mercer was preparing to tell the jury exactly what happened on that Georgia road. And his account would reveal that Rachel's death was not the beginning of the crime. It was the moment when a secret that had been hidden for months finally turned deadly. The courtroom doors had barely opened when the first cameras appeared outside. For 35 years, Rachel Monroe had been a name attached to a photograph, a file number, and a question that refused to disappear. Now the question had a defendant. Thomas Avery sat behind his attorneys, staring straight ahead. He was 78 years old. His hands trembled slightly. His face was expressionless. Across the courtroom sat Rachel's family. Her sister held the same photograph investigators had circulated in 1987. Rachel was smiling in it. 26 years old. Alive. Unaware that the photograph would eventually become the face of one of Georgia's most haunting cold cases, the prosecutor began with the timeline. November 14th, 1987. Rachel arrived at work. She spent much of the day reviewing financial records. She made notes. She questioned transactions. She spoke with David Mercer. Then she left. That was the last confirmed moment anyone could say with certainty that Rachel was alive. Everything after that had once been a mystery. Now investigators believed they could reconstruct it. Rachel drove away from work. She was seen later on a rural road. A green pickup appeared behind her. A dark sedan followed at a distance. The vehicles separated. Then Rachel's car was found abandoned. The prosecutor displayed the photograph. The driver's door open. Keys inside. One shoe beneath the door. The courtroom became silent. Then came the silver button. A technician described the discovery. It had been recovered from the passenger area of Rachel's vehicle. At the time, nobody knew what it meant. Decades later, investigators found the missing button on Avery's old jacket. The jacket had been kept by his family. It had survived 3 decades inside a storage container. One button was missing. The surrounding thread was torn. Microscopic traces were still present. The laboratory recovered biological material. Rachel's DNA was consistent with the sample. The defense objected to the interpretation. The judge allowed the evidence. The prosecutor turned to the jury. One button, one jacket, one car, one dead woman, and 35 years of silence. But the prosecution knew the button alone would never be enough. So the next witness was called. Linda Hayes, the former dispatcher. She walked slowly to the witness stand. Her hair had turned white. Her hands were clasped tightly together. She had kept the original dispatch notes. The prosecutor placed them on the screen. A handwritten entry, 11:47 p.m. Mail caller, Rachel Monroe, green truck, possible location. Hayes described the call. The voice had been nervous. The caller seemed frightened. He gave enough information to suggest he had been near the scene. Then he disappeared. The defense asked why the caller had never been identified. Hayes said she did not know. Could the caller have been lying? Yes. Could he have been mistaken? Yes. Could he have been trying to mislead police? Yes. The defense attorney turned toward the jury. The prosecutor waited. Then Hayes was asked one final question. Did the caller sound like someone who knew Rachel? Hayes thought for several seconds. Yes. How do you know? He said her name like he was afraid to say it. The courtroom fell quiet. The next witness was the fuel station clerk. His name was Samuel Collins. He was 90 years old. He needed assistance walking. But when he saw the photograph of Avery's green pickup, his expression changed. He remembered it. He remembered the night. He remembered the purchase. Leech. Rope. Late at night. The prosecutor asked whether Avery was the man who bought them. Collins pointed directly toward the defendant. Yes. The defense attacked his memory. 35 years. Aged eyesight. Old photographs. Possible suggestion. Collins admitted all of it. Then the prosecutor asked, "Do you remember the truck?" Collins nodded. "Do you remember the driver?" "Yes." "Why?" Collins looked at Avery. Because he looked nervous. Then came the detail investigators had almost missed. Collins remembered a second vehicle, a dark sedan. The driver stayed outside. He watched Avery. He watched the road. And he never entered the store. The prosecutor showed Collins a photograph of David Mercer. Collins stared at it. His lips tightened. "That looks like him." "Are you certain?" "No." The defense smiled. The prosecutor did not challenge him. He simply moved on. Because the next witness was stronger. Evelyn Carter. She had lived near the road where Rachel disappeared. She had never wanted to testify. For decades, she had carried the memory alone. She told the court she woke shortly after 11. She heard dogs barking. Then, headlights. 2 vehicles. The green pickup. The dark sedan. She watched them stop. She heard voices. A woman's voice. 2 men's voices. One angry, one calm. The prosecutor asked whether she recognized the angry voice. Yes. Whose? Thomas Avery. Avery shifted in his chair. The prosecutor asked about the other voice. Evelyn said she did not know the man personally, but she remembered hearing him say one thing. "Thomas, stop." That was enough to place 2 men at the scene. But then Evelyn described Rachel. She had never known Rachel's name that night. She only knew she heard a woman begging someone to stop. The prosecutor asked what happened next. A door slammed. Then, something hit metal. Then, silence. Rachel's sister began to cry. The judge ordered a short recess. The courtroom emptied. Avery remained seated. He did not look at anyone. Outside, reporters repeated the same word. New witness. 35-year-old memory. 2 vehicles. 2 men. A frightened woman. When court resumed, the prosecutor moved to the financial records. That was where the case changed from a violent encounter into something larger. Rachel had discovered suspicious payments. She had copied documents. She had written names in the margin. David Mercer. Thomas Avery. The prosecution showed the jury the handwritten notes. Rachel had written, "Ask David." Then, "Thomas knows where it goes." And finally, "I think they know I found it." The defense objected. The notes did not prove murder. The judge agreed. But the prosecution was not claiming they did. They were showing motive. Rachel had discovered something. She had confronted the wrong people, and according to the prosecution, she had become a threat. The prosecutor then introduced the cassette. The room darkened. The recording began. Static. A faint voice. Rachel. Her words were difficult to hear. But one sentence came through clearly. If something happens to me, they have the copy. Rachel's sister covered her face. Avery looked down. The recording stopped. The prosecutor let the silence remain. Then David Mercer entered the courtroom. He was the witness everyone had been waiting for. Mercer was older than Avery. His face looked exhausted. He walked past Avery without looking at him. He took the witness stand. The prosecutor asked whether he knew Rachel. Yes. Whether he knew Avery. Yes. Whether he had been on the county road that night. Mercer paused. Yes. The courtroom seemed to tighten. Was Rachel there? Yes. Was Thomas Avery there? Yes. Was Rachel alive when you arrived? Yes. Mercer stared at his hands. The prosecutor asked what happened. Mercer said Rachel had confronted Avery. She had told him she had copies of the financial record. Avery wanted the documents. Rachel refused. They argued. Avery grabbed her. Rachel fought back. Her hand caught his jacket. The button tore away. Then Avery struck her. Mercer said he heard the impact. He looked toward Rachel. She was on the ground, not moving. The prosecutor asked whether he called police. No. Why? I was afraid. Of Avery? Yes. Why? Mercer looked toward the defendant. Because I knew what he was capable of. The defense attorney stood. He attacked Mercer for nearly an hour. You lied to police. Yes. You lied to your wife. Yes. You helped hide the body. Yes. You helped move Rachel's car. Yes. You kept silent for 35 years. Yes. And now you're telling this jury Thomas Avery killed her because you want to save yourself? Mercer swallowed. Yes. The attorney smiled. So you're a liar. Mercer nodded. I was. The attorney stopped. Mercer continued. But I am not lying about Rachel. The courtroom went silent. The prosecutor then asked Mercer about the burial. He said, Avery took Rachel to the property. He said the green pickup carried the equipment. Rope. Shovel. Tarp. He said. Avery dug. He said he helped cover the grave. Then he described something that investigators had never known. Rachel's purse. Mercer said Avery opened it. Inside were copies of the financial documents. Avery took them. Mercer believed they were destroyed, but they weren't. The waterproof envelope found years later contained the surviving copy. That discovery supported part of Mercer's account. The defense immediately challenged it. They argued that Mercer knew about the documents because investigators had told him. But detectives testified that the envelope had been found before Mercer disclosed its location. He could not have known where it was. That mattered. Then came the forensic evidence. A DNA specialist explained the biological material recovered from Rachel's clothing. Avery's genetic profile was consistent with the sample. The defense asked whether the contact could have happened before the night of the murder. Yes, that was an important concession. The DNA alone did not prove murder, but the prosecutor connected it to the button, the jacket, the torn stitching, the biological material, the vehicle, the witnesses, the timeline. Again and again, the same name appeared, Thomas Avery. Then, investigators introduced the green pickup. It had been preserved in photographs. Avery had owned it in 1987. The truck's interior had shown signs of cleaning. The original investigators had noticed that. They had not understood why. Modern forensic analysis found traces of soil inside the truck. The soil was consistent with the burial property. The defense argued Avery regularly worked there. The prosecutor showed the jury the date of his last documented work visit, 2 weeks before Rachel disappeared. Then the date of the photograph showing his truck after the disappearance. The difference was obvious. Something had changed. Fresh soil, a shovel, a tarp, and a jacket missing one button. The defense insisted there was an innocent explanation for every item. The prosecutor did not disagree. Then he asked the jury to consider all of them together. That was the central argument. No single clue solved the case. The case was solved by the clues converging. The button connected Avery's jacket to Rachel. The DNA connected Avery physically to Rachel. The witness connected Avery to the scene. The truck connected him to the burial property. The financial records gave him a possible motive. Mercer connected him to the confrontation. Rachel's own recording established that she feared the men, and the burial site established that someone had deliberately hidden her body. The prosecution then revealed one final piece of evidence, a photograph. Taken the morning after Rachel disappeared, Avery stood outside his garage. His green pickup was behind him. A shovel rested in the truck bed. A large tarp covered something. Fresh soil was scattered across the ground. The defense objected. The judge allowed it. Avery stared at the photograph. For the first time, he looked angry. The prosecutor asked the jury to look closely. There was one detail. A small tear in the jacket sleeve. The same jacket. The same missing button. The same garment connected to Rachel's DNA. The courtroom became silent. The prosecution had spent decades of evidence in less than a week. Now the defense had one final opportunity. Their argument was simple. Memory was unreliable. Mercer was compromised. The physical evidence was old. The button was tiny. The DNA could not establish timing. The financial scheme did not prove murder. The weapon was missing. The prosecution had a story, but a story was not proof. The defense attorney repeated one phrase, reasonable doubt. The jury left. Rachel's family remained in the courtroom. Avery sat alone. Mercer waited in another room. Hours passed. Then the doors opened. The jury returned. Everyone stood. The foreperson handed the verdict to the clerk. The clerk opened the paper. The room stopped breathing. On the charge of murder, a pause. Guilty. Rachel's sister closed her eyes. 35 years. 35 years of photographs. Rumors. False leads. Empty graves. Questions. And now one answer. Thomas Avery had been found guilty. But the verdict did not explain everything. It did not explain why Mercer had stayed silent. It did not explain every movement that night. It did not explain what Rachel had discovered beyond the financial record. And it did not explain the strange final document found after the trial, a handwritten note. Hidden among Rachel's old paper, 6 words. They know I found everything. Beneath it was a name. A third name. A name nobody had expected. And that discovery reopened the investigation once again, because the murder had been solved. But the secret behind it might not have been. The name beneath Rachel's handwriting was not Thomas Avery. It was not David Mercer. It was a name investigators had never seen in the original case file. Frank Delaney. For several seconds, nobody in the evidence room spoke. The document had been found after Avery's conviction, sealed inside an old envelope that had belonged to Rachel's family. The paper was yellow. The ink had faded. But the name remained clear. Frank Delaney. Below it, Rachel had written a date. November 12th. Still 1987. 2 days before she disappeared. And beneath the date were 4 words. Ask him about Atlanta. That sentence changed the investigation again. Avery had been convicted of Rachel's murder. Mercer had admitted helping conceal the body. The case appeared finished. But the note suggested something else. Rachel had been investigating someone before she died. Someone outside the 2 men already known to investigators. Someone named Frank Delaney. Detectives searched the original records. Nothing. No interview. No witness statement. No financial disclosure. No photograph. No mention of the name. It was as if Frank Delaney had never existed. But he had. A retired investigator eventually found a reference buried inside an unrelated business file. Frank Delaney had worked as an outside consultant for one of the companies Rachel had been examining. His name appeared on invoices. His signature appeared on contracts. And his company had received payments from the same accounts Rachel had flagged. Suddenly, the financial scheme looked larger. Mercer had approved transactions. Avery had received money. But Delaney's company had collected much more. Investigators followed the money. The trail led through several shell companies. One had been registered in Georgia, another in Alabama. A third had been dissolved months after Rachel disappeared. Delaney had been the director of one. He had also owned property near Atlanta. The phrase Rachel had written suddenly made sense. Ask him about Atlanta. Detectives found Delaney's old address. The house was gone. The property had been sold in 1994, but the county records remained. Delaney had left Georgia in 1989. He had moved to North Carolina, then Tennessee, then disappeared from public records. Investigators began searching for him. They found him living under the same name in a small town. He was 81, a retired businessman, a grandfather, a man who had apparently spent decades believing nobody would ever ask him about Rachel Monroe. Detectives arrived at his home early one morning. They showed him the photograph. Rachel, 26 years old. Delaney stared at it. Then he looked away. The detective noticed his hands trembling. Did you know her? Yes. The answer came immediately. Not confusion. Not hesitation. Recognition. Did she work for your company? No. Did she investigate your company? Delaney said nothing. The detective placed the financial records on the table. Rachel's handwritten notes. Mercer's approvals. Avery's payments. Delaney's company. Then the detective placed the final note in front of him. Ask him about Atlanta. Delaney's face changed. He leaned back. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he asked a question. Who found that? The detective answered. Rachel's family. Delaney looked toward the window. She's been dead a long time. Yes. You already convicted Avery. Yes. Then, why are you here? Because Rachel wrote your name down 2 days before she disappeared. Delaney closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he looked exhausted. She should have left it alone. The detectives exchanged glances. That sentence was not a confession, but it was not the response of a man who had never heard of Rachel. They asked what she had discovered. Delaney refused to answer. They asked about Avery. He denied knowing him. They asked about Mercer. He said he knew him professionally. Then they asked about Atlanta. Delaney stood. The interview ended. But investigators had something. Fear, not proof. Fear. They returned to the financial record. The Atlanta connection became their focus. They discovered that Rachel had traveled there once. November 10th, Sill 1987. She had not told her family. She had not mentioned the trip at work. But a motel receipt survived. One night, paid in cash, under a shortened version of her name. The motel was located less than 3 miles from Delaney's office. Rachel had been there 2 days before her disappearance. Why? The investigators found the answer in another document. A handwritten appointment. November 10th, 7:30 p.m. FD? Rachel had met Frank Delaney. That meant she had confronted him. 2 days later, she was dead. The investigation became darker. Detectives reviewed the financial scheme again. Rachel had not simply discovered missing money. She had discovered a chain. Money moved from one company to another, then to another, then into property acquisitions. Some of those properties were connected to Delaney. Some were maintained by Avery. Mercer approved the paperwork. Rachel had noticed. She had begun tracing the money. She had followed it to Atlanta. And she had apparently confronted Delaney. The motive grew, but the murder itself remained connected to Avery. So, why had Delaney disappeared from the original investigation? The answer came from a former detective. He had worked the case in 1987. He remembered Delaney. He had questioned him. But the interview had never been included in the main file. The detective explained why. Delaney had produced an alibi. He claimed he had been in Atlanta on November 14th. He had hotel records, business receipts, 2 witnesses. At the time, investigators accepted it. But now there was a problem. The hotel records showed Delaney had checked out on November 14th, not November 15th. The difference was crucial. He could have returned to Georgia that night. And investigators discovered something else. His car had been serviced in Atlanta on November 13th. The mechanic remembered the vehicle. But the mileage recorded on the service invoice was much higher than expected. The car had traveled hundreds of miles. Where had it gone? The original detective had never asked. Now investigators did. They reconstructed the route. Atlanta to the county road. Then back. The distance was possible. The timing was possible. But possibility was not evident. Then the laboratory produced something unexpected. The old dark sedan seen near the fuel station had been photographed in the background of a newspaper image. The image was from the day after Rachel disappeared. The photograph was taken outside a local business. A dark sedan was visible behind the crowd. Its license plate was partially obscured, but modern enhancement recovered several characters. Investigators ran the combination through historical vehicle record. The plate belonged to Delaney, not Mercer. The room went silent. For decades, everyone had assumed the second vehicle belonged to Mercer. Now evidence suggested it might have belonged to Delaney. The retired fuel clerk was shown the photograph. He stared at it. Then he shook his head. That is the car. Whose car? He looked toward the detective. That's the other car. The investigators asked whether he could identify the driver. The clerk said no, but the vehicle was the same. The case had suddenly expanded. Avery's green pickup, Delaney's dark sedan, Mercer somewhere in the middle, Rachel caught between three men, and a financial secret linking them. Investigators returned to Mercer. They placed Delaney's photograph in front of him. Mercer stared at it. Then his face turned pale. You knew him, the detective said. Mercer nodded. Why didn't you tell us? I was afraid. Of Avery? Mercer shook his head. Of Delaney. That was the first time Mercer had named someone else. He explained that Delaney was not simply a businessman. He controlled the money. He had connections. He had influence. And Avery had worked for him. Mercer had approved transactions because Delaney told him to. Rachel had discovered the arrangement. Then she began asking questions. Mercer said Delaney became angry. He told Mercer to make Rachel stop. Mercer claimed he did not know what Delaney intended, but he knew Rachel was in danger. That explained the diary. David says they are getting close. Mercer's wife had written it. Not necessarily about police, about Rachel, about Delaney, about the people surrounding her. Then Mercer made another admission. He had called Delaney on November 14th. The call lasted less than a minute. The original phone records confirmed it. The call had never been investigated. The timing was terrifying. It happened shortly before Rachel left work. Mercer refused to explain exactly what Delaney said, but he remembered one sentence. Take care of it. 4 words. Nothing more. Mercer claimed he did not know whether Delaney meant the financial records or Rachel herself, but he understood the threat. The prosecution had already convicted Avery. Now investigators faced an entirely different question. Had Avery killed Rachel on his own? Or had he been acting under instruction? The physical evidence still pointed to Avery. The button. The DNA. The confrontation. The burial. But motive could now extend beyond Avery. Perhaps Rachel had been silenced because she was about to expose the entire operation. Perhaps Avery was the man who carried out the violence, and Delaney was the man who wanted her stopped. That theory would explain why Delaney's name appeared in Rachel's notes. It would explain the Atlanta meeting. It would explain the dark sedan. And it would explain why Mercer had been terrified. But there was one problem. Delaney had an alibi. A strong one. And if investigators wanted to accuse him of involvement in a murder that happened 35 years earlier, they needed more than suspicion. They needed something physical. Something that placed him near Rachel. They searched his old records. They searched his former properties. They searched vehicles. They searched financial documents. Then they found a photograph. It had been taken at a business meeting in Atlanta. November 10th. Sill 1987. Rachel was not visible. But Delaney was. Standing beside him was a man investigators immediately recognized. Thomas Avery. The 2 men were together. 4 days before Rachel disappeared. And on the table between them was a folder. The same type of folder Rachel had used for her financial copy. The photograph did not prove murder, but it proved the men knew each other. It proved Avery had traveled to Atlanta. It proved Delaney and Avery had met days before Rachel's death. Then investigators examined the hotel records again. Avery had also been in Atlanta. His name appeared in a maintenance invoice. He had traveled there for work. The men had been together. Rachel had been there. The financial records connected all 3. And for days later, Rachel was dead. The investigation now had a new center. Not the road. Not the burial site. Atlanta. The place Rachel had gone because she believed she had discovered something. The place where she had met Delaney. The place where Avery had also been. And the place where the money had disappeared. But the most disturbing discovery was still waiting. Investigators found a second notebook. This one had belonged to Delaney. It was recovered from an old storage facility. Most of the pages contained business notes, dates, names, payments, addresses. Then investigators reached November 14th, Sill 1987. The page had been torn out. Not removed cleanly. Torn. A small fragment remained. Only a few handwritten letters were visible. RM, and beneath them, 11:30. The same night. The same woman. The same time. For the first time, investigators had evidence suggesting Delaney had been tracking Rachel's movements. The cold case had already been solved in court. Thomas Avery was convicted. But now another question was emerging. Who had ordered the silence? Who had arranged the money? Who had put Rachel in danger? And why had a tiny clue in a forgotten file led investigators toward a much larger secret? The answer was no longer buried only in Georgia. It stretched south toward Atlanta. And somewhere inside that missing page was the detail that could finally determine whether Frank Delaney was merely a businessman who knew too much, or the man who set Rachel's final night in motion. The torn page became the most important piece of paper in the investigation. It was barely an inch wide. Most of the writing was gone. Only 2 letters remained clearly visible, RM, and beneath them, 11:30. For 35 years, nobody had known what happened at 11:30 on the night Rachel Monroe disappeared. Now investigators had a possible connection. Frank Delaney had written something down. Rachel's initials. A time. November 14th. Sill 1987. The page had been torn from a business notebook and hidden inside a storage box containing old tax documents. There was no explanation. No address. No description. Just the initials and the time. Detectives photographed the fragment. Then they compared the handwriting with Delaney's known record. The writing matched. There was no longer any question that he had written it. The question was why? Investigators returned to the timeline. At 6:08 p.m., Rachel left work. At 6:41, her car was seen near the county road. At 7:03, a witness reported a green pickup nearby. At 8:17, a dark sedan was seen heading in the same direction. At 9:02, Rachel's phone stopped transmitting. At 10:48, Avery purchased rope and bleach. At 11:31, the fuel station receipt was created. At 11:47, the anonymous caller contacted dispatch. And at 11:30, according to Delaney's notebook, something connected to Rachel had been scheduled. The times did not fit neatly, but they were close enough to demand attention. Investigators wondered whether Delaney had been waiting for Rachel or waiting for information about her. They searched telephone records. Most had disappeared, but a few archived billing statements survived. One call stood out. Delaney's office had called Mercer's home at 10:56 p.m. The call lasted 37 seconds. Then, at 11:04, a second call went from Delaney's office to a number belonging to Avery. That call lasted 51 seconds. 7 minutes later, Avery's green pickup was seen leaving a gas station. The sequence was chilling. Delaney called Mercer. Then, Avery. Avery bought supplies. Then Rachel's car was abandoned. Then someone called police anonymously. Investigators still could not prove what happened during those minutes, but the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. They questioned Mercer again. This time, they showed him the torn page. His reaction was immediate. He recognized it. That was his handwriting, Mercer said. Whose? Delaney's. What does 11:30 mean? Mercer stared at the page. I don't know. You expect us to believe that? Mercer shook his head. I don't know what it means. The detective pushed the photograph toward him. Rachel's initials. Mercer closed his eyes. Then he whispered. He was watching her. That sentence changed the direction of the investigation. Mercer explained that Delaney had become increasingly concerned about Rachel during the weeks before her disappearance. She had discovered payments. She had copied records. She had started asking employees questions. She had contacted people outside the company. She had even threatened to take the documents to investigators. Delaney feared exposure. Mercer said Delaney had instructed him to recover the copy. Mercer failed. Then Delaney turned to Avery. Avery was not an accountant. He was not a businessman. He was useful because he could intimidate people. Mercer claimed Delaney knew Avery could frighten Rachel into backing down, but Rachel did not back down. She kept digging. And then she went to Atlanta. That trip became crucial. Investigators found the motel where Rachel had stayed. The building still existed. The clerk who had worked there was dead, but archived registration cards had survived. Rachel had checked in using the name R. Monroe. She had paid cash. She stayed one night. The room number was 214. Detectives searched old maintenance records. Nothing unusual. Then they discovered a handwritten message on the back of the registration card. The handwriting was not Rachel. It said, "Meeting moved. No name. No time." But the ink was similar to Delaney. Investigators sent it for examination. The result was inconclusive. The paper was too degraded. The writing could not be positively identified. Still, the possibility remained. Rachel had gone to Atlanta expecting a meeting. Someone had changed it. Perhaps she had met Delaney somewhere else. Perhaps she had discovered something during that trip that frightened her. Her sister remembered Rachel returning home late that night. She had seemed exhausted. She had refused to explain where she had been. But she had said one thing. I know who is behind it. At the time, her sister thought Rachel was talking about missing money. Now the words sounded different. Rachel knew someone. She knew someone powerful enough to frighten her. And she had written that name down. Frank Delaney. Investigators began reconstructing Delaney's movement. He claimed he had remained in Atlanta on November 14th. His hotel record showed him checking in, but hotel cameras did not exist in 1987. There was no digital record, no GPS, no phone location data, only paper, receipts, witnesses, and mileage. His vehicle had been driven. That was undeniable. The service record showed the car had accumulated nearly 400 miles between November 13th and November 15th. Delaney claimed an employee had used it. That employee was dead. His widow said he had not worked that weekend. The alibi began to collapse. Then detectives found the car. Not Delaney's original vehicle. That had been destroyed years earlier, but photographs showed its distinctive rear bumper, a small dent, a white mark. The same damage appeared in a photograph taken near Rachel's abandoned car. The image was blurry. The vehicle was distant. But forensic specialists enhanced it. The shape matched. The plate characters were partially visible, and the plate belonged to Delaney. The evidence was still circumstantial, but it placed him near Rachel. The investigation moved faster. Detectives searched Delaney's old property records. One document showed that he had purchased a small tract of land outside Atlanta in early 1987. 6 months later, the land was transferred to another company. That company received money from the same network Rachel had been investigating. Then another transfer. Another company. Another payment. The money kept moving. Rachel had followed it. She had found the pattern. She had traced the money toward Delaney, and then she disappeared. But investigators still needed to understand Avery's role. Avery had already been convicted. He could not simply be questioned as an ordinary witness. His lawyers agreed to an interview only under strict conditions. Detectives traveled to the prison. Avery sat across from them. For years, he had denied knowing anything. Now he knew investigators had found Delaney's name. The detective placed the photograph of the Atlanta meeting on the table. Avery stared at it. He did not speak. You were there. Silence. You met Delaney. Silence. Rachel was there. Avery looked up. No. The detective placed another photograph beside it. Rachel. Then the motel receipt. Then the financial documents. Then the torn notebook page. Avery's expression changed. You think he killed her? The detective said nothing. Avery looked down. Then he laughed quietly. It was not amusement. It was disbelief. You don't know what you're looking at. What are we looking at? Avery leaned back. You think this was about money? The detective waited. Avery continued. It wasn't. The room became silent. What was it about? Avery shook his head. I've already told you everything. No, you haven't. Avery refused to answer. But before the interview ended, he said something that investigators wrote down immediately. Rachel found something she wasn't supposed to find. That sentence matched everything they had already suspected. But then Avery added, Delaney wasn't the only one. The detective asked who else was involved. Avery stopped talking. He asked for his attorney. The interview ended. Investigators left with more questions than answers. Delaney was not alone. There was someone else. Someone Rachel had discovered. Someone Avery feared naming. The detectives returned to the financial records. They searched every company, every director, every shareholder, every bank account. One name appeared repeatedly in older documents. William Harker. Harker had been a county contractor. He had worked on several properties connected to Delaney. He had also received payments from Mercer. And in 1987, he had been responsible for excavation work on the very property where Rachel was eventually buried. Investigators froze. Harker had access to the land. He had equipment. He knew the terrain. He knew Delaney. He knew Avery. And he had never been questioned about Rachel's disappearance. The original case file contained no interview with him. Not one. Detectives searched for Harker. He had died in 2003. But his family still lived in Georgia. His son agreed to speak. He remembered his father talking about the property. He remembered a strange night in November 1987. His father had returned home late. His clothes were dirty. There was mud on his boots. And he had told the family not to ask questions. The son had been 17 at the time. He had never understood why. Then the detective asked whether his father owned a shovel. The son laughed. Everyone in construction owns a shovel. What about a particular shovel? The detective showed him an old photograph. The shovel recovered near the burial site. The son stared at it. Then his face changed. That belonged to my father. The room went silent. The shovel had been catalogued as generic evidence. No serial number. No fingerprints. Nothing that could identify the owner. But now a family member recognized it. Investigators compared photographs of Harker's equipment. The shovel matched. It had a distinctive bend near the handle. The same bend appeared on the tool recovered near the grave. That meant someone connected to Delaney had access to the burial site. The case was becoming larger. Rachel's murder had been prosecuted as the act of one man, but the evidence suggested a network. Avery had confronted Rachel. Mercer had helped conceal her body. Harker may have provided equipment or access, and Delaney may have been the person directing the operation. But investigators still needed to prove it. They searched Harker's old belongings. His son gave them permission. Inside a metal toolbox, they found old receipts, construction supplies, fuel, equipment rentals, and one receipt dated November 15th, Sill 1987, the day after Rachel disappeared. The item? Industrial-grade plastic sheeting. Paid in cash. The store was located near the burial property. The receipt had Harker's initials. Suddenly, the pieces were beginning to connect. The tarp, the shovel, the burial site, the truck, the men, the financial scheme, Rachel, and the name Frank Delaney. Yet the strangest clue was still the simplest, the torn page. RM, 11:30. Investigators finally understood that the time might not represent the murder. It could represent the moment Delaney expected something to happen. Perhaps Rachel was supposed to meet someone at 11:30. Perhaps Avery was supposed to bring her. Perhaps Delaney was waiting for confirmation. They searched phone records around that time. At 11:28 p.m., a call was placed from a payphone near the county road. The number dialed belonged to Delaney's office. The call lasted 19 seconds. The payphone was less than half a mile from where Rachel's car was found. The caller was never identified. But someone had been there. Someone had contacted Delaney 2 minutes before the time written in his notebook. For the first time, investigators had a possible explanation for the mysterious 11:30. Delaney may have been waiting for the call, and if so, someone had called him from the scene. The question was who? Avery? Mercer? Harker? Or someone else entirely? The cold case had started with a tiny silver button. Now it had become a much larger investigation. A forgotten notebook. A missing page. A motel room. A dark sedan. A financial trail. A shovel. A phone call. And a name Rachel had written down 2 days before she died. Frank Delaney. But the detectives were about to discover something that would make the entire case even more disturbing. The payphone records showed another call, placed just minutes after Rachel's car was abandoned. This one was not made to Delaney. It was made to a private number in Atlanta, a number registered to a woman. And that woman had never appeared anywhere in Rachel's original case file. Her name was Margaret Vale. And according to the records, Rachel had called her 3 times during the week before she disappeared. The name Margaret Vale appeared only once in the original telephone record. 3, all made by Rachel, all within 5 days of her disappearance. Nobody had interviewed Margaret in 1987. Nobody had searched for her. Nobody had even written her name in the case notes. Now investigators were looking at the records again. The first call had lasted for minutes. The second lasted 11. The third lasted 23. Then, on the night Rachel disappeared, someone called Margaret's Atlanta number from the payphone near the county road. The call lasted 19 seconds. That meant somebody at the scene had contacted Margaret. The investigators needed to know why. Margaret Vale was 69 years old. She lived alone. When detectives arrived, she was waiting for them. She had already seen Rachel's photograph on television. She knew why they had come. The first question was simple. Did you know Rachel Monroe? Margaret nodded. Yes. How? She came to me for help. With what? Margaret hesitated. Money. The detectives exchanged glances. What kind of money? Money that wasn't supposed to exist. Margaret explained that she had worked as a bookkeeper for a small Atlanta investment company in 1987. The company had handled accounts for several contractors. One of them was connected to Frank Delaney. Rachel had contacted Margaret after discovering irregular transactions. She wanted confirmation. She wanted someone outside her workplace to examine the number. Margaret agreed. Rachel visited Atlanta on November 10th. She brought copies, invoices, bank statements, property transfers, checks, names. Margaret remembered the meeting. Rachel was frightened. Not panicked. Focused. She believed someone was stealing money through a network of companies. Margaret told her she was right. But the numbers showed something more disturbing. The money was not simply being stolen. It was being moved into property, land, buildings, construction contracts, assets that could later be sold. The operation was designed to hide the trail. Rachel had discovered it, and she had begun tracing the people behind it. Margaret told investigators she had warned Rachel, "Don't go back to them." Rachel asked why. Margaret said, "Because they know how to make people disappear." The detective stopped. "Did you mean that literally?" Margaret shook her head. "I didn't know it would happen." Then she revealed something she had never told police. Rachel had left documents with her. Copies. Evidence. Rachel said if anything happened to her, Margaret should give them to someone she trusted. Margaret had hidden them for 35 years. The detectives asked where. Margaret disappeared into another room. She returned carrying an old metal box. Inside were photocopies. Rachel's handwriting appeared on several pages. One page contained 3 names: David Mercer, Thomas Avery, Frank Delaney, and beneath them was another name: William Harker. The investigators already knew Harker. Now the 4 men were connected in Rachel's own note. But one line beneath the names was more important. Who gives the orders? That question had never been answered. Margaret told detectives Rachel believed Delaney was not the highest-ranking person. She believed someone else controlled the money. Someone who never appeared on the paperwork. A hidden partner. Rachel had been trying to identify that person. Margaret remembered Rachel saying, "Delaney takes instructions too." The investigation suddenly moved beyond murder. It became an attempt to uncover the structure Rachel had discovered. The detectives asked Margaret why she had never contacted police. Her eyes filled with tears. "Because they came to my house." "Who?" "I don't know." "Men?" "Yes." "How many?" "2. "When?" "The night after Rachel disappeared." Margaret said the men told her to forget Rachel. They did not threaten her directly. They did not need to. One of them placed a photograph on her kitchen table. A photograph of Rachel. Then he said, "She won't be coming back." Margaret had been terrified. She burned the photograph. She kept the documents. Then she remained silent. For 35 years. Now investigators wanted to know who the 2 men were. Margaret could not identify them. But she remembered one detail. One wore a ring. A heavy silver ring with a dark stone. The other had a scar across his left hand. That description was compared with old photographs. Avery had no visible scar. Mercer had no such ring. Harker had a scar on his left hand. And Delaney had owned a distinctive silver ring. The pieces began to overlap. But investigators still needed stronger evidence. They returned to Margaret's documents. One page contained a property transfer. The buyer was a company called Southern Ridge Holding. The company had been dissolved in 1990. Its registered address was an empty office. The listed director was William Harker. But the bank records showed something else. Payments had been made by an account controlled by Frank Delaney, and the money originated from an account associated with another company. That company belonged to a man named Charles Whitmore. The 4th name. The hidden partner. Rachel had been searching for him. Whitmore had died in 1998, but his son was still alive. Investigators contacted him. He said his father had been involved in real estate. Nothing more. Then detectives asked about Delaney. His answer changed. "My father knew him." "What about Thomas Avery?" A pause. "Yes." "David Mercer?" Another pause. "Yes." The 4 men were connected. The son admitted that his father held private meetings with them. Where? At a hunting property outside the county. A secluded place. No neighbors. No cameras. No records. Except one. A guest log. The property owner had kept handwritten entries. The log survived. November 1987. Several names appeared. Delaney, Parker, Avery, Mercer, and one final entry, November 14th. No name, just R.M. Rachel Monroe. The handwriting did not belong to Rachel. It belonged to the property caretaker. He remembered seeing a young woman arrive. He remembered she looked upset. He remembered two men arguing with her. Then he went inside. He never knew what happened afterward. The caretaker had died in 2006, but his son had inherited the property record. The guest log had been untouched. Investigators now had a possible meeting location. The final night might not have begun on the county road. It may have begun at the hunting property. Rachel could have been taken there. The question became how. Avery's truck? Delaney's sedan? Both. The investigators returned to the vehicle evidence. Rachel's car had been abandoned later. That meant she had likely entered another vehicle. Avery's truck had traces of soil. Delaney's sedan had been seen nearby. Parker had access to the property. Mercer admitted being involved. The four men had opportunity. The financial records provided motive. But who had ordered Rachel's death? That was still unknown. Then investigators discovered a photograph inside Margaret's documents. It showed Rachel standing beside Margaret in Atlanta. The date was November 10th. Rachel was holding a folder. On the folder was a handwritten symbol, a triangle. Margaret explained that Rachel had used it to mark the documents connected to the hidden account. The same symbol appeared on another document, a payment authorization. The signature belonged to Delaney, but beneath it was another set of initials, C.W. Charles Whitmore, the hidden partner. Rachel had been closer to the truth than anyone realized. She had identified the money. She had identified Delaney. She had identified Avery. She had identified Harker. And she had begun tracing the money to Whitmore. 2 days later, she was dead. The detectives searched Whitmore's old records. His estate had been settled years earlier. Most documents had been destroyed, but his son had kept one box. Inside was a photograph. Four men stood together. Delaney, Avery, Parker, Mercer. The photograph had been taken in 1986. Whitmore stood beside them. 5 men, one organization, one network. The image became central evidence. The defense would argue it proved nothing. People could know each other. Businessmen could meet. Contractors could work together. That was true. But the financial records told another story. Money moved between them. Properties were transferred. Companies appeared and disappeared. And Rachel had discovered the pattern. Then came the most disturbing document. A letter, unsigned, found inside Whitmore's box. The letter was dated November 13th, still 1987, one day before Rachel disappeared. The message was short. Rachel has the records. Delaney says, Avery will handle it. Investigators stared at the sentence. It appeared to describe the murder before it happened. The letter was not signed. The writer was unknown. But the paper came from Whitmore's office. The handwriting did not match Delaney. It did not match Avery. It did not match Mercer. It belonged to someone else. Someone investigators had not yet identified. The case had now reached another level. Rachel's death might have been planned, not necessarily by Avery, not necessarily by Delaney. Perhaps both. Perhaps someone higher. Someone who knew Rachel had the documents. Someone who wanted the records destroyed. Someone who had decided that Rachel herself had to disappear. The detectives returned to the anonymous 11:47 p.m. call. The caller had said Rachel was dead. He had known. But how? If he was not at the scene, he needed information. If he was at the scene, he had witnessed the aftermath. The phone records showed the call originated from a payphone. The location was near the abandoned car. Investigators searched old maps. The payphone stood beside a closed diner. The diner had been demolished in 1995, but the owner was still alive. He remembered the phone. He remembered a man using it that night. And he remembered the car parked nearby, a dark sedan. The owner could not identify the driver, but he remembered the man entering the diner early. He had ordered coffee. He sat alone. He looked at the clock repeatedly. 11:20, 11:25, 11:30. Then he left. The man had been waiting. Waiting for what? The owner described him. Middle-aged, dark coat, silver ring. The investigators looked at the photographs. Delaney wore a silver ring, a distinctive one. A dark stone, the same description Margaret had given. Now Delaney was being placed near the scene. At the exact time Rachel disappeared, the prosecution had already secured Avery's conviction, but investigators now believed Delaney might have been present. They questioned him again. This time, he stopped cooperating. His attorney ended the interview, but detectives obtained a warrant for his old business record. They searched everything: bank statements, calendars, letters, receipts, personal notebooks, and in a forgotten desk drawer they found a folded map. The map showed the county road, the burial property, the hunting property, and the diner. For locations, a line had been drawn between them: Rachel's route. The line ended at the hunting property. Beside it was a handwritten time, 11:30, the same time from the torn page. Investigators finally understood. The page had not recorded Rachel's death. It had recorded the meeting point, the meeting that had been planned. Rachel was supposed to be there at 11:30, and someone was waiting. The question was whether she went willingly or whether she was forced. The answer came from another tiny clue: a motel key, recovered from a box of Rachel's possessions. Room 214, the Atlanta motel. The key had been preserved because her sister never threw anything away. Rachel had returned from Atlanta with it, but investigators noticed something: a faint smear of dark residue on the metal. Modern testing revealed traces of industrial adhesive, the same type used on envelopes found in Whitmore's office. That suggested Rachel had handled documents connected to Whitmore. She had carried them. She had hidden them. She had planned to expose the network, and someone knew. The detectives now had a terrifying timeline. Rachel met Margaret. Rachel discovered the hidden financial network. Rachel confronted Delaney. Rachel returned home. Rachel was watched. Rachel's documents were targeted. Rachel was lured or taken to a meeting. The men gathered. The call was made. The body was moved. The records were hidden. Then the silence began. But there was still one question nobody could answer. Who wrote the anonymous letter? Who wrote, "Rachel has the records"? Delaney says, "Avery will handle it." The handwriting expert finally returned with an answer. The writer was not Whitmore, not Delaney, not Avery, not Mercer. The handwriting matched someone else, a name that had appeared nowhere in the original investigation, a name that belonged to a woman. And when detectives found her identity, they discovered something even more disturbing. She had been Rachel's closest friend. Her name was Susan Bell. And according to the evidence, Susan had spoken to Rachel less than 2 hours before she disappeared. Susan Bell had been sitting on the edge of Rachel's bed when the phone rang. That was what Susan remembered most clearly. The room was quiet. Rachel had been moving papers from one folder to another. She looked exhausted, distracted, afraid. Susan had known Rachel since college. They had stayed close even after their lives changed. When Rachel began talking about the financial records, Susan initially thought it was simply another problem at work. Then Rachel showed her the names: Mercer, Avery, Delaney, Whitmore. Susan realized this was different. Rachel told her she had found money moving through companies that seemed unrelated. She had followed the trail from Georgia to Atlanta, then farther. The numbers connected people who were never supposed to be connected. Rachel believed someone was using construction contracts and property purchases to hide money. Susan asked what she planned to do. Rachel said she was going to the police. Susan remembered Rachel pausing before saying it, not because she was uncertain, because she was frightened. "She knows I'm looking," Rachel said. Susan asked who. Rachel did not answer. Instead, she placed a folder on the table. Inside were photocopies, bank records, contracts, property documents, and a handwritten list. 5 names. Susan remembered seeing one name circled twice: Frank Delaney. Rachel said she had met him in Atlanta. He had tried to convince her that she was misunderstanding the records. Rachel did not believe him. Then she said something Susan would remember for the rest of her life. "He knows I know." The phone rang again. Rachel answered. Susan could hear only one side of the conversation. Rachel became silent. Then her face changed. She said, "No." A pause. "I told you I'm not giving them to you." Another pause. Then, "You don't get to decide what happens to me." Rachel hung up. Susan asked who had called. Rachel refused to answer. The clock showed 9:41 p.m. Susan left shortly afterward. She told Rachel she should stay with her. Rachel refused. She said she needed to finish something. Susan walked to her car. Before leaving, she looked back at the house. Rachel was standing at the window, watching. That was the last time Susan saw her alive. For 35 years, Susan never told police about that conversation. Not because she wanted Rachel's killer protected, because she was terrified. The detectives now knew why. The handwriting analysis had linked Susan to the anonymous letter. The letter saying, "Rachel has the records," Delaney says. "Avery will handle it." Susan had written it, but she insisted she had not written it in 1987. She said she had written it years later. Investigators placed the document in front of her. She stared at it. Then she began crying. "I wrote it." "When?" "After Rachel disappeared." "Why?" "Because I knew." "What did you know?" "That Delaney was involved." "How?" Susan looked down. "Rachel told me." The detectives asked why she had never come forward. Susan's answer was simple. "They came to me." "Who?" "I don't know." "Two men?" Susan nodded. "When?" "The next morning." The same morning Rachel's body was still hidden. The same morning Avery's truck had been photographed. The same morning Mercer returned home. Susan described the men. One was tall. One was shorter. The tall man wore a dark coat. The shorter man had a scar across his left hand. Parker. Again. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Susan said they did not threaten her directly. They placed Rachel's photograph on the table. Then they told her to forget everything she knew. Susan asked whether Rachel was alive. The tall man answered, "No." Susan said she knew then that Rachel had been murdered, but she did not know who had done it. The detectives asked why she wrote the letter. Susan said she wanted to protect herself. She wrote down what Rachel had told her. She hid the letter. Then she never spoke about it again, except now, 35 years later. The detectives asked about the phone call at 9:41. Susan remembered the number. She had seen it on Rachel's caller ID. There was no caller ID system in the modern sense, but Rachel kept a handwritten phone log. Susan had seen her write the number down. Investigators searched the old telephone record. The number belonged to Delaney's office. The call had been made at 9:41, 38 minutes before Rachel's supposed meeting. That placed Delaney directly in contact with Rachel, but the timing suggested something else. The confrontation had already begun before Rachel left. She had been pressured. She had refused. Then she disappeared. Investigators asked Susan whether Rachel had mentioned a meeting. She nodded. She said someone wanted her at the old hunting property. When? 11:30. The room went silent. The torn page. RM. 11:30. Rachel's meeting had been scheduled. Susan had known. Rachel had known. Delaney had known. The question was, who had arranged it? Susan said Rachel believed Delaney wanted the document, but Rachel did not intend to hand them over. She said she was going there because she wanted answers. Did she say she would be alone? Susan shook her head. She said someone would be waiting. Who? She didn't know. That detail changed the timeline. Rachel had not simply vanished. She had gone somewhere expecting a confrontation, and she had believed she could survive it. Perhaps she had been wrong. Investigators returned to the hunting property. They searched the buildings again. This time, they focused on the old caretaker's quarters. Behind a wall panel, they found a metal hook. The hook had been used to hold keys. One key remained. It belonged to an old storage shed. The shed had been demolished years earlier, but county maps showed where it had stood. Investigators brought excavation equipment. They dug beneath the old foundation. At first, nothing appeared. Then a detector alerted. A metal box. Inside were documents. Not financial records. Photographs. Dozens of them. Most showed properties. Some showed vehicles. Others showed people. Rachel appeared in 3. She was being watched. One photograph showed her outside the accounting office. Another showed her leaving her home. The third showed her meeting Susan. The date was November 14th. The photograph had been taken only hours before Rachel disappeared. On the back was a handwritten time. 9:17 p.m. Investigators compared the handwriting. It was not Delaney's, not Avery's, not Harker's, not Mercer's, but the same handwriting appeared on several other photographs. Someone had been documenting Rachel's movements. Someone had been following her. The investigators now knew the murder was not entirely spontaneous. Rachel had been watched before she died. Her meeting had been arranged. Her movements had been recorded. Someone knew she had the documents. Someone knew where she lived. Someone knew she was going to the hunting property. That suggested planning. But who was giving the instructions? Investigators returned to Delaney. He denied ordering anyone to follow Rachel. He denied knowing about the photograph. He denied visiting the hunting property. Then they showed him the image of Rachel. 9:17 p.m. His expression hardened. Where did you get that? Does it matter? Yes. Why? Delaney said nothing. The detective placed another photograph beside it. Avery's green pickup. Then Harker. Then Mercer. 4 men. 4 connections. Delaney finally spoke. You don't understand what Whitmore was doing. The investigators stopped. What was he doing? He wasn't stealing money. Then what? He was buying silence. Silence filled the room. Delaney explained that Whitmore had been involved in a network of illegal payments. But the money had not only been used to enrich the men. Some of it had been used to pay people who could influence investigations, contracts, inspections, and legal dispute. Delaney claimed he had become trapped. He said Avery had been recruited as muscle. Harker handled property and equipment. Mercer moved paperwork. Whitmore controlled the money. Rachel had discovered enough to expose the entire structure. That was why she had become dangerous. The detectives asked who ordered her death. Delaney refused to answer. They asked whether he had been at the hunting property. No. They showed him the photograph of his vehicle. He stared at it. No. They showed him the motel record. Nothing. Then they placed the anonymous letter on the table. Susan's handwriting. Delaney read it. His face went pale. She survived. Who? Susan. The detectives leaned forward. Why does that matter? Delaney looked toward the door. Because she knows who wrote the orders. Who? He shook his head. I can't say. Why? Because he's still alive. That sentence changed everything. For decades, investigators believed the central mystery was who killed Rachel. Now another mystery emerged. Who had ordered it? Delaney was implying that someone above him had survived. Someone who had remained hidden. Someone who had never been investigated. The detectives asked for a name. Delaney refused. They asked again. He refused. Then they told him they had Susan's statement. They had the photographs. They had the financial records. They had the phone calls. They had the hunting property. They had the letter. They had enough to charge him with conspiracy. Delaney finally broke. He gave them an address. A house outside Savannah. The name was Robert Vale. Margaret Vale's brother. The detectives froze. Margaret had spent decades protecting Rachel's documents. Robert was connected to the Atlanta Financial Company. And according to Delaney, Robert had been the person receiving instructions from Whitmore. But Robert had never appeared in the original investigation. He had never been interviewed. He had never been listed as a suspect. He had lived quietly for decades. And he was still alive. Investigators drove to Savannah. Robert Vale opened the door. He was 84. He recognized the detectives immediately. Then he saw the photograph they carried. Rachel Monroe. His face changed. He whispered. They finally found it. The detective asked. Found what? Robert stared at Rachel's photograph. The last account. What account? Robert looked toward the hallway. Then he closed the door. He told them the truth had never been about one missing woman. It had been about an account hidden for years. An account containing names, payments, photographs, and evidence that could expose everyone involved. Rachel had found it. Whitmore had known. Delaney had known. Avery had been sent to retrieve it. But Rachel had made copies. And the account was still active. The detectives asked where. Robert gave them a location. A bank vault in Atlanta. The account had not been closed. It had been untouched. Waiting. 35 years. The detectives obtained a warrant. Inside the vault was a sealed package. On the outside, written in Rachel's handwriting, were 6 words. If I disappear, open this. The detective stared at the envelope. The entire room seemed to stop breathing. Rachel had left one final message. Not for her family. Not for police. For whoever was brave enough to keep searching. The envelope contained a photograph, a list of names, and one final document. At the bottom of the page was a signature. The signature belonged to a man who had never been questioned. And his name was not Robert Vale. It was someone much closer to Rachel than anyone had imagined. Ohio, 1987. Cold case solved. Decades-old clue leads to shocking arrest. For 29 years, the evidence sat in darkness. The blood sample was stored in a cardboard evidence box. The torn fabric was sealed inside a plastic envelope. The original photographs had faded. Witness statements had yellowed. Names that once filled the police department had disappeared from the building. Some detectives had retired. Others had died. And Emily Carter's case had become exactly what every family feared, a cold case. But in the spring of 2016, Detective Rachel Monroe opened the file again. She had been assigned to a newly formed unit responsible for reviewing unsolved homicides and disappearances. Her office was buried beneath old boxes. Every case had a story. Every story had a beginning that stopped somewhere before the truth. Emily's file was different. The first thing Monroe noticed was the blood, not because it was dramatic, because it had never been fully identified. In 1987, investigators had established only that the stain contained male human blood. That was all. No name, no DNA profile, no suspect, no answer. Monroe stared at the original evidence sheet. One line was circled in red pencil. Unknown male blood sample. She called the laboratory. Is it still preserved? There was a pause. Then the technician checked. The answer came back several hours later. Yes, the sample still existed. Monroe requested immediate testing. Nobody in the department expected what happened next. The DNA extraction was difficult. The evidence was old. The sample had been stored through decades of temperature changes and multiple evidence transfers. But there was enough. A partial profile was recovered. The laboratory entered the information into the national database. No match. Monroe was disappointed. For several seconds. Then she looked at the report again. No match did not mean no suspect. It meant the person who left the blood had never provided DNA to the system. That changed everything. The profile became the center of the investigation. Monroe reopened every witness statement. She began at the beginning. Emily's mother. The neighbor. The teenager. Daniel Mercer. Thomas Vale. One name appeared again and again. Not because police had proved anything, because the name kept appearing near the gap. Thomas Vale. Monroe studied his original interview. 3 pages. Short answers. No visible panic. No confession. No obvious contradiction. But one line stood out. Vale claimed he went directly home after leaving work. Investigators in 1987 had never been able to confirm it. Monroe contacted the old repair shop. The business no longer existed. The building had been demolished. But tax records led her to the former owner, 81 years old, living in a nursing home. His memory was fading. At first, he remembered nothing about Emily. Then Monroe mentioned Thomas Vale. The old man looked up. You mean Tommy? Yes. Quiet kid? Do you remember the night Emily Carter disappeared? The man stared at the window. For almost a minute, he said nothing. Then he spoke. Tommy cut himself. Monroe stopped writing. What? At work. On his hand. When? I don't know. Was it that night? The man closed his eyes. I remember blood. That was enough. Monroe obtained old employment records. Vale had been working late on the night Emily vanished. He clocked out at 10:41 p.m. But there was something missing from the payroll file. A medical report. 3 days later, Vale had visited a small urgent care clinic. The record still existed in archived form. The reason for the visit was a deep cut on his left hand. Vale told medical staff he had injured himself while repairing a truck. The wound required stitches. Monroe read the report twice. The blood in Emily's house had come from an unknown male. Vale had suffered a serious injury less than 72 hours after she disappeared. The timing was suspicious, but suspicion was not evidence. She needed his DNA. Investigators could not force Vale to provide a sample without legal authority, so they began watching him. By 2016, Vale no longer lived in Ohio. He had moved several times. Kentucky, Tennessee, Arizona. His life looked ordinary. He had worked construction jobs, married, divorced, married again, raised children. There was no public sign that he had ever been connected to a woman who vanished in 1987. That silence bothered Monroe. She traveled to Arizona with 2 investigators. They did not knock on his door. Not yet. They watched. For 4 days, Vale followed the same routine. Breakfast at a small diner. Hardware store. Worksite. Home. On the 5th day, he stopped at a fast food restaurant. He ordered a drink. Sat alone. Then walked outside. He threw the cup into a trash container. Investigators waited. Minutes later, the cup was gone. Taken under surveillance. Sent for testing. The result arrived 6 weeks later. No match. Thomas Vale's DNA did not match the blood found inside Emily Carter's house. The investigation stopped. For 1 day, Monroe refused to close the file again. Instead, she asked a different question. If Vale had been at the house, but the blood was not his, then whose was it? And if Mercer had also been questioned, what about him? Investigators tested Daniel Mercer. His DNA did not match either. The 2 original suspects were eliminated as the source of the blood. The cold case suddenly became more complicated than before. Someone else had been inside Emily's house. Someone police had never identified. Monroe returned to the evidence inventory. She noticed another item, the strip of fabric, collected near the back door. It had been tested in 1987. No useful result. In 2016, the laboratory examined it again. This time, microscopic testing revealed biological material embedded deep inside the fiber, a degraded male DNA profile, the same unknown profile found in the blood. Monroe sat silently in the laboratory. The blood and the fabric came from the same person. One man, inside the house, bleeding, leaving behind part of his clothing. That man had never been identified. But Monroe now had something investigators in 1987 never possessed: forensic genealogy. The process was slow. The profile was uploaded through authorized investigative channels. Months passed. Then a distant family connection appeared. Not a name. A family branch. A possible relative. Monroe and a forensic genealogist began building the tree backward. Birth records. Marriage certificates. Obituaries. Old census information. Every generation opened another door. The work was exhausting. Some names were wrong. Some records had been lost. Others led nowhere. Then one surname appeared. Harlan. The genealogist stopped. The name appeared again. And again. Eventually, the family tree led to an Ohio man who had been 27 years old in 1987. His name was Richard Harlan. Monroe searched the original case file. Nothing. No interview. No witness statement. No criminal record. Richard Harlan had never been questioned. That was the first truly shocking discovery. Police had spent decades looking at Mercer and Vale. Meanwhile, another man may have existed completely outside the investigation. Monroe began reconstructing his life. In 1987, Harlan lived less than 4 miles from Emily's house. He worked part-time as a delivery driver. His route included the neighborhood where Emily lived. He had access to a dark-colored pickup truck. And one record made Monroe stop cold. Harlan had worked with Thomas Vale. Not at the repair shop. At a second job. The 2 men knew each other. The connection had never appeared in the original investigation. Monroe searched deeper. Harlan had disappeared from Ohio in 1988. No crime. No warrant. No public explanation. He had moved to Indiana. Then Missouri. Then Colorado. The pattern was almost identical to Vale's movements. 2 men. Both connected. Both near the original investigation. Both leaving Ohio after Emily vanished. But only one DNA profile. Investigators needed confirmation. They located Richard Harlan in Colorado. He was 56. Still alive. Still working. Still unaware that detectives had reopened a case from 1987. Monroe flew there. This time, she did not wait outside. She walked to his door. Harlan opened it. His expression changed when she showed her badge. What is this about? Emily Carter. For several seconds, Harlan did not move. Then he said something Monroe would never forget. That was a long time ago. She had not told him when Emily disappeared. She had only said her name. Monroe watched him carefully. Did you know her? No. No. Did you ever go to her house? No. Did you know Thomas Vale? Harlan's jaw tightened. I knew a lot of people. Did you see him in 1987? I don't remember. Did you ever drive a green pickup truck? No. No. The answers came quickly. Too quickly. Monroe asked for a voluntary DNA sample. Harlan laughed, then closed the door. That was the moment the investigation changed direction. The cold case finally had a new suspect, but Monroe still had no warrant, no direct DNA match, no confession, nothing she could place in front of a jury. She returned to Ohio and began digging through records connected to Harlan. One old document led her to a former landlord. The woman was 90 years old. She had rented Harlan a small apartment in 1987. At first, she remembered nothing. Then Monroe showed her a photograph. The woman stared at it. That truck. What about it? Richard had one. What color? Green. Did it have a stripe? The woman nodded slowly. White stripe. Monroe felt the room close around her. The same truck description. The same neighborhood. The same year. But there was more. The woman remembered a night when Harlan came home late. Very late. His hand was wrapped in a towel. She asked what happened. He said he cut himself. When? I don't remember. Was it around the time Emily Carter disappeared? The old woman looked down. I think so. Another fragment. Another connection. Another door opening. Investigators searched Harlan's old record. A vehicle registration surfaced. Dark green pickup. White side stripe. Registered to Richard Harlan in 1987. The truck had been sold 3 weeks after Emily vanished. The buyer was dead. The truck itself had been destroyed years earlier, but the registration was real. The timeline was real, and the witnesses were beginning to point toward the same man. Then came another discovery. A telephone company archive contained billing records from a payphone less than 2 miles from Harlan's apartment. 2 calls had been placed to Emily Carter's home on the night she disappeared. One lasted 22 seconds. The second lasted 9. Nobody answered. The person using the phone was never identified, but Harlan's work route passed directly by the gas station. Investigators could not prove he made the call. Still, the pattern was growing. A man connected to Emily's neighborhood. A man connected to Vale. A man with a green truck. A man who suffered an unexplained hand injury. A man whose biological relatives were consistent with the DNA profile. And a man who reacted to Emily's name as if he had been waiting 30 years to hear it again. Monroe knew one thing. Richard Harlan was not going to confess voluntarily. If the case was going to move forward, the evidence had to move faster than his silence. Then, an unexpected witness called the department. His name was Robert Hale. He was 86 years old. He owned a towing business in 1987, and he said he had carried a secret for nearly 3 decades. I saw the truck, he told Monroe. What truck? The one you're looking for. Monroe said nothing. She let him continue. It was green. Her hand stopped moving across the notebook. White stripe. Now the room was completely silent. When did you see it? The night that girl disappeared. What happened? Hale took a long breath. Then he said the words that would drag the entire investigation into a terrifying new direction. Someone paid me to tow a car out to the quarry. Monroe looked at him. What car? I never saw it clearly. Who called you? I don't know. Did you see the driver? Yes. Can you identify him? Hale looked at the photograph of Richard Harlan. His hands began to shake. Then he pointed. That's him. The cold case was no longer buried. The past was moving. And Richard Harlan had just become the man investigators believed could finally explain what happened to Emily Carter.